Thank you very much. I'm Councilmember Jose Huizar. This is the Public Works Committee, and we have several items. We will begin with 4, 5, 6, and 7. I am going to have all of those go consent unless there is someone on staff that needs to make any technical changes or amendments to any of these items. No, we have one speaker card at number 5 for questions only. Is that correct? Okay, there are no questions, so we'll have items 4, 5, 6, and 7 consent. And those will go to full council as a directive from the chair. Thank you. Items 1, 2, and 3 we will take together, and if the clerk could read items 1, 2, and 3, please.
Item number 1 is the Board of Public Works report relative to the Special Events One-Stop Shop Program Annual Report for fiscal year 09 and 010. And item number 2 is an item continued from November 17, 2010. It's a Bureau of Street Services report in response to motion Huizar and Perry relative to the amendment to the Municipal Code 41.20 requiring special event permit sponsors to be responsible for public notification of pending events and for the requirement be administered by the One-Stop Special Events Permit Office. Item number 3 is also another item continued from November 17, 2010. It's an Office of Finance report in response to motion by Council Members Huizar and Councilwoman Han relative to the development of a drop payment installment plan for non-profit sponsors of special events and related matters. This item was also referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Thank you very much. So item number 1 is a set of recommendations from staff on how to improve our special events policy. Item number 2 is generally a motion that I put in to clear up some issues regarding public notification of pending events. Item number 3 regards a motion that I put in to see if we could develop a draft payment plan from some of these groups that request to have public events in our public spaces. We'll take up, although we're going to take them together, item number 1 will first be discussed in more detail, and then we'll go into 2 and 3 in more detail. So if we could have staff come up and present item number 1. I have a public speaker. If you wish to speak before or after the staff presentation, want to speak before or after?
I'll go before.
You want to go now? Okay. Sarah Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Walsh. I'm here on behalf of the Motion Picture Association of America. And I just wanted to briefly thank the committee and your staff, as well as Street Services, for responding to our industry's concerns on film premieres. As you know, these are routine events in areas where we have established relationships with the communities. And so we're very pleased to see recommendation 12 in this report, and we're hopeful that the city will adopt this as its policy on film premieres. And I just wanted to thank you again for your continued efforts to keep filming here in Los Angeles.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if staff could come up and present this item, please. So Commissioner Alarcon, if you could lead us through this discussion, okay with you?
Good afternoon, Council Member. Andrea Alarcon, Commissioner and Vice President of the Board of Public Works. It's my pleasure to present to you, on behalf of the Board of Public Works, the first annual special events report to this committee for consideration. As you are aware, in October of 2009, the Special Events Ordinance was enacted by the city. The primary intent of the ordinance was to recover all costs for city services in support of special events. Over the course of the past year, the Bureau of Street Services has permitted over 500 special events, generated over $2 million of revenue for the city. So clearly the intent of the ordinance was satisfied and was met. Having said that, this past year has been a learning experience, and I think Councilmember Parks said it best, that the intent of the ordinance was sound, but the mechanics of the ordinance need fixing. And so the report before you contains 14 recommendations to fine-tune the ordinance as is. I am here joined by all of the city departments. This is a collaborative effort amongst Bureau of Street Services, LAPD, LAFD, Department of Transportation, Building and Safety, and all the other city members of the city family. And so they're here to answer any specific questions. The Bureau of Street Services administers the process. We receive the applications for special events. We then disseminate the applications to all city departments. They maintain jurisdiction over their deployment. They assess the events. They determine deployment, calculate costs, get their cost estimate back to the Bureau of Street Services. We then compile all of that information into one permit total cost. We relay that information to the event sponsor, and then we issue the permit based on a variety of other requirements having been met. So they can answer specific questions, and if you have, in terms of deployment for LAPD, I know that several of the members are concerned about how those assessments are made for varying special events. So they are here to answer your questions. I can walk you through each of the 14 recommendations, or I can respond specifically to your concerns about any one of the 14.
Well, let's do this. If any of the other departments have any general comments, and then we'll go through each one quickly and see if there's any questions. We don't have to have a full presentation on each, but we could have see if there's any questions on each one.
All right.
Any other general comments from any of the departments? If there's specific items, we could take it up at that time, but otherwise, any general comments?
Just,
We're going to send it to budget department. We're going to send it, yeah.
just briefly, Michael Bowman, Commander, Public Safety, Fire Department, and Chief Mark Storms, Assistant Fire Marshal. Just briefly, we work collaboratively with Public Works Commission and Commissioner Alarcon, and we're really excited about making this process a very workable process for the city and for our departments, having that ability to have a cost recovery venue for us going forward from here. The fire chief prioritizes this so high that he's made a specific work group with tasks to support Commissioner Alarcon's efforts, and with that, having the fire department's input and support is very much appreciated.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Well, let's, we could go through each item quickly, and then if there's any questions, really, that's the purpose of going through it.
Absolutely. So recommendation number one.
Before we do that, I wanted to raise a couple of specific questions, and as you're talking about each of the provisions, maybe you could embellish those that might help us with the two issues I raised. The first one is specific response to the permit process. We are seeking to, I believe, impose a time frame on when they have to submit their permit applications. Conversely, we do not have a time frame imposed on the departments to get the information back, and so I was wondering if we could do that, and if so, what would the appropriate time frame would be. There are some permits that have been issued the day before the event, and I don't think that's irregular, and that could cause tremendous upheaval to the organizers of the events, and it could diminish the quality of the events as well. So it seems to me only fair that if we're going to impose an application time frame, that we ought to impose a response time frame on the departments, and if they don't, then I think the applicants should get some kind of financial benefit, like a discount if the departments do not respond in time. Secondly, the question that comes up often with groups that I've worked with, and I'm not talking about my district, I'm primarily talking about citywide groups, is where's the money going? And is there an accounting for, if they're paying, $50,000 to this or that department, is there an accounting for that money, and how do they get access to it to make sure that they weren't overbilled or billed incorrectly? So those are my two big concerns, and I don't know whether the 14 recommendations address them or how they address them. If you could focus on that a little bit.
Sure. And actually, I'll respond to your two concerns at the outset. In terms of the timeliness of the applications and the responsiveness of the departments, the ordinance sets forth that applications must be submitted within 45 days of the event, at a minimum, at least 45 days. So we receive the applications ideally within 45 days of the event date. Internally, our goal is to get a response from all of the departments within 2 weeks. Now, practically speaking, we don't always meet our goal. Ideally, we try to meet the goal, but in certain months, like the month of February, when we have it's award season, there are various major events occurring back to back. We've got NBA All-Star Weekend, which is taking up essentially all of our resources over the course of 1 week. It becomes overwhelming for all of the departments, so we may not receive the responses from each of the departments within the 2-week time frame, but again, that is our goal. I think each department has their own internal timeframes. I don't know, PD, do you want to speak to your?
This is Captain McDonald from EOD. I'm going to have my Lieutenant Ray Garvin speak on the specifics.
Thanks, sir. For the police department, once we receive the application from Street Services, we send it out. Our mandate or our attempt is to get it back within 3 days. Because really the first estimate is the down and dirty estimate, because, boss needs something to, in my understanding, is to get the permit process going, so they need a dollar figure or an estimate. So we require our divisions to get back with us within 3 days, and we're usually about on the front end getting that to them pretty quick. And then if we have to revise it based on other information down the road, we can always revise it. But we usually, I think we do a pretty good job on the front end of getting them in there.
So we do have internal goals. We may not always meet them. Sometimes we fall short of those goals, but we do have internal goals. Ideally, we try to get them in within 2 weeks. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And we can speak to, in terms of the staffing availability, the ordinance was enacted authorizing 5 position authorities for the Bureau of Street Services to implement this ordinance and this new citywide permitting process. However, immediately upon enactment, those 5 positions were frozen. And so we have been permitting, at least for the first 8 months of the citywide permitting process, we have been managing and administering this process with 0 staff. Utilizing our investigators on loan from other programs, revenue-generating programs like our news racks and other illegal vending and sign postings and other programs. And so it's been very, very difficult for us to administer this program. We very recently, and the CAO, Representative John Chavez is here, and he could respond to concerns about staffing, but we were very recently given authority to unfreeze and to fill one of our critical positions, which is a programmer analyst 3. Thus far, we are working to fill it, but again, staffing challenges are.
Okay, so that was then. This is now. Assuming we approve the full complement of 5 positions, would we be able to commit to hard timing dates, deadlines for the departments, to make sure that the events have ample time to organize their events with the full knowledge that they have a permit?
Speaking on behalf of the Bureau of Street Services, we absolutely would be able to uphold a time frame. However, our responses to the event sponsors are contingent upon us receiving the information from all of the various departments. So it would be contingent upon all of the other departments committing to that same time frame.
So that's why the question is to everybody.
Well, from our perspective, when the estimates are forwarded out to us, in other words, we're supposed to evaluate a particular event and then do estimates. First thing I would like to address that many of them, the vast majority of them, are fairly pedestrian events, and we can make that turnaround without much effort. Some of them are much more complex, significantly complex, and the development of those plans to come up with that ultimate estimate can be problematic in the extreme. But I would also say that, with Commissioner
For those larger events, might we require a longer application period?
True, but at this point, some of them do, and some of them do comply with that, and so we go through the process. We've been working on the NBA, thing for, months and months, and the marathon process, and many of those, but they don't all come under. It's not that clean. But the biggest issue I'd like to say, though, is that while I would fully support, and I would hope that you would as well, Commissioner Alarcon's needs for appropriate staffing on her end, that doesn't necessarily reflect that staffing on our end would be issues would be alleviated. We're still, tight in those areas. So in some cases, we get overwhelmed with these events, even in a given geographic area. That'd be multiple events within this very specific time frame, and so we're tasking, a finite amount of people to do a number of different events. So we work through it, and as my lieutenant said, and Ms. Alicon says, I think that we're pretty effective and efficient in it in the aggregate. And that's not an excuse. I think that's reality. I think we're doing a good job. But point is made.
I'm not pointing to any particular department. I just want us to understand that we truly rely on some of these major events to generate revenue for the city. I mean, it pays for many of the positions that are working in this, and not only in a direct sense, but in the overall economic consumer activities that are involved around the event. It greatly benefits Los Angeles, and so I just want to send a message to all the departments that this is all of our bread and butter. So whether everything from the Academy Awards, we don't want them going to other cities, and then we'll have less revenue to work with and have to make further cuts, and it just exacerbates the problem. So whatever the event is, we want to make sure that we get them a timely response.
I would like to add, Tom Carabello, Bureau of Street Services. But one of the other things that we need to consider at this point, the way the ordinance is the fact that there is no deterrent for submitting late these last-minute applications. So we may be receiving, like working on the NBA stuff, months in advance, but that doesn't account for all the special event applications that we get the week of. I mean, like you stated, sir, we're issuing permits the same day, Friday. We're scrambling, trying to get costs, and that's because there is no deterrent for turning these applications in less than 21 days in advance. So right now, it's only a $312 fee if you turn in an application 21 days less or within the event. And we're still scrambling to try to get those permitted, but that does impact the responses and the other departments, their response to submit their information to us in a timely manner. There needs to be a deterrent, and I think that's one of the recommendations that we're putting forward, is that the time frame, that we hold people accountable to the time frame, and that there is a consequence for turning in your application 21 days less within the event, and staff having to scramble to try to get those costs.
As far as fire department, our process is very similar to LAPD, and we work concurrently. One thing, mind you, is we concur that the final plan for a lot of these events, and the NBA All-Star is a prime example. We've been working on this for months and months and months, but they still, even to this date, don't know exactly the final footprint of what all their special events for that, so that dovetails in this as well. Secondly, too, with managed hiring and vacancies, for us to hold ourselves accountable as a city is, we've got to be caution on that. If we're going to do and hold vacancies in these critical special event positions, that's going to hamper our ability to get back in the timely manner in some cases. But as a priority of the department, speaking for the fire department, we put a priority and on our professionalism, being able to get all our events done in an efficient manner and on time, and we've been very successful in that.
And the second part of the question was the accountability for the costs.
Yeah. So your question in terms of the accounting, the cost that we relay over to, the final total cost that we relay over to the event sponsor is an estimated cost for city services. After the event occurs within 30 to 60 days, the actual costs for city services are reconciled against those estimates. So in the case that city services, so if LAPD, for instance, intends to deploy one officer for 10 hours, however, at the 7th hour they deem that officer is no longer necessary, they release them. The cost will then be reduced by the 3 hours, and then the event sponsor will receive a refund in that amount.
Great, thanks.
Great. Do you want to
Sure, we
Let's
can,
go through the recommendation.
yeah, and I think we spoke about recommendation number one. It's essentially that the council requests the managed hiring committee prioritize and expedite the unfreeze of the 2 remaining critical special event positions. Those are absolutely critical. Right now, we are functioning with 1 senior clerk typist in managing the entire citywide permitting process. That is an unfeasible personnel status, and so we absolutely are requesting that we continue to push managed hiring committee to prioritize the unfreeze of those critical positions. Recommendation 2, that the council approve modifying the special events permit procedure to amend the title from closure of streets to special events. It's a fairly minor change. However, the title of the section implies that a special event requires a street closure, and that is not necessarily the case. The ordinance provides that a special event is defined as any event that requires, whether it's on public or private property, any event that requires city services above normal deployment levels. It doesn't require a street closure. So the notion that the section title is street closures sort of gives the wrong implication to those that read it. So we're just asking that that be amended to read special events. Recommendation number 3 is that the council approve modifying the ordinance to define a major special event. As is, the ordinance specifically outlines what a special event is, but there is no differentiation between a special event and a major special event. Now, there are outlined in this recommendation some examples of factors that can be taken into consideration for what would constitute a major special event. These are some of the things that each of the departments use in their internal assessments. But, for instance, the NBA All-Star event would be a major event. The Grammys would be a major event. Those types of events of greater magnitude would qualify as a major special event, and they require much more planning. And so we would like to differentiate special events from major special events so that we can provide ample application time, the submission of all of the information in advance prior to the 45 days as is required for regular special events. Recommendation 4 is that that we amend the ordinance to provide appropriate application timeframes for both special events and major special events. So as I noted earlier, the ordinance as is currently stipulates that event applications need to be submitted at least 45 days prior to the event date. That applies to all events. But in the case of a major event like the NBA All-Star Week, which we have been planning for months, 45 days would simply be insufficient. And so we would like to have there be a differentiation in terms of timeframes that apply to special events and major special events. Recommendation 5 is that we increase the late application fee. As Tom Caravello noted, the late fee is simply a $312 fee if you submit it within 21 days of the event. And for most major events that we would qualify as a major event, that's simply the cost of doing business. But it is really prohibitive and difficult for city departments to manage and process those applications within less than 21 days. And so we're recommending that the late fee be increased so that it's actually a deterrent to submitting those late applications. Untimely applications is recommendation number 6. As is, the ordinance doesn't set a cutoff where applications will no longer be processed. And so, for instance, to date, I am working on an application that was received yesterday for an event to be held on Friday. And I'm scrambling with each department trying to navigate and get it done. At this juncture, it doesn't seem, I think we've got maybe a half an hour left after this meeting to try and finalize that permit because DOT needs to post their signs, but it really is an unmanageable process when we receive these applications this late in the game, and so we would like there to be a cutoff for and a designation of an untimely application whereby we will no longer be able to process those applications. Payment of fees, I think, is one of the most critical portions of the ordinance, and I think is the one that is most council members are familiar with. The ordinance requires that payment of all fees, cost for city services, permit fees be paid prior to issuance of the special event permit.
Now, in many instances, we've seen that these costs are prohibitive for nonprofit organizations and smaller organizations who have historically held, wonderful events, 30th annuals, 40th annual, festivals, and so on, and they just do not have the money to front those fees, which can be exorbitant. Sometimes they're upwards of $100,000, and so it's a very difficult number to deal with, to contend with for a nonprofit organization that historically has never paid for any of these types of fees. And so what we did in order to alleviate some of the burden on some very specific events, we executed, working directly with the CLA's office, we executed letters of agreement with very specific event sponsors, allowing them, as a condition of their permit approval, allowing them additional 10 days' time. They would submit their fees within 10 days of completion of the event. In those instances, they received donations on the day of the event, and so that allowed them the ability to have their event, have it be a success, submit their fees within 10 days, which seemed to be reasonable. And in most instances, those agreements were all met, and executed by me and each of the various council members in those districts. So recommendation 7 is essentially what I referred to. All of the terms that are stipulated that are stipulated in those letters of agreement are outlined here. The way that we came to identify those events that would qualify for a letter of agreement were essentially these: that the event is non-commercial, the event sponsor is a nonprofit organization, that they submit a written request for payment deferral to the Board of Public Works, that they agree, this is new, that they agree to submit a deposit. For the few letters of agreement that we executed, we didn't require a deposit be paid, but we believe moving forward, if we were to amend the ordinance, that a deposit should be received, at least 10% for the estimated cost for services, and that there be a threshold, because if there's got to be some sort of threshold. At this point, we've indicated a $10,000 threshold for costs. If we were to defer all payment, if there was no threshold, every special event would request deferral, and we would continually be catching up with those costs. And 6 is clearly that the council office submits their letter of support for the event. Recommendation 8 is a subsidy credit. So there are some events. Taste of Soul is one in Councilmember Parks' district, which was the prime example of where this worked successfully. The event the total costs were approximately $50,000. It was sponsored by a nonprofit organization. They didn't have the $50,000 to front fund. They did receive some funds on that day, but they are also receiving a 50% subsidy from the Citywide Special Events Fund. The process to receive the actual citywide subsidy takes several months. And so what this is intended to do is essentially give them a credit for the 50% subsidy that they will eventually receive, and we will ask for the remaining 50% to be deposited with the city.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Paul Smith, CLA. We had broached this idea very early on in the process. The city attorney said that at that time that the ordinance really said 100% upfront, but we had worked through some of these installment plan procedures, and we also thought that the subsidy approach may be helpful in moving the process along. So with the advice of the city attorney that we would have to modify the ordinance and to allow for this credit to be established, that's why that recommendation is in here today.
Recommendation 9 is that the CLA be authorized to develop an expedited subsidy review process for subsidies under $1,000. We came up with the $1,000 threshold, but clearly we can move that up. We're flexible in terms of the threshold, but there are some event sponsors who really rely on a $300 subsidy from the city, yet it requires 3 months of internal city processing, and that becomes prohibitive for the event sponsor. So for those smaller subsidies, we'd like to ask that the CLA be authorized to develop an expedited subsidy review process.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Paul Smith again. I akin this to what we're doing with block parties, which are around $300 to $500 fees. They're pretty straightforward events. We even have a process now where we can direct pay back to the departments. The individual neighborhood and group doesn't even have to put the money up front. If we can structure a plan that have smaller special events that are not really involved with a lot of departmental costs, we can keep it below the $1,000 mark. We would like to structure something that would move this thing forward in a quicker and easier way.
Recommendations 10, 11, and 12 relate to the notification and petition process. Recommendation 10 is that the Bureau of Street Services make it a standard permit condition that every special event sponsor, in addition to the petition notification, distribute a leave-behind document with all of their event details on that document. In some instances, responsible event sponsors who plan ahead, may submit their application to host an event in January. They submit their application in January for an event to be held in October. They go and circulate their petition. They get the signatures in January, but the affected property owners and business owners don't remember in October what they signed in January and when the event is, what date it is, what time it is, which streets will be closed. And so this is just a very simple way of documenting the logistics for the event for all adjacent property owners. Recommendation 11 is really in response to some concerns voiced by the business improvement districts that the Bureau of Street Services develop a special event notification district program, SEND program, whereby additional notification measures can be employed within boundaries of a specific district. So a bid, for instance, in the fashion district and so forth, could vote by an action of their board of directors vote to enhance notification measures in their very specific area. Recommendation 12, the Bureau of Street Services exempt entertainment and film premieres from notification measures beyond the standard petition requirement. I think early on there was conversation about electronic messaging and so forth, but as notification relates to film premieres and entertainment premieres, most of those events occur at the same locations and occur on a regular basis, and to require additional notification measures, I think, would be not only visual blight on sidewalks and so forth, but I think it's just redundant and unnecessary. So we would like to request that an exemption be carved out for entertainment and film premieres. And then in terms of planning costs, recommendation number 13, the special event ordinance as is authorizes the Department of Transportation to charge for planning costs, but the ordinance is not clear whether other city departments can charge for planning costs. The recommendation is neutral in terms of whether we should or should not charge for planning costs. Personally, I don't believe that we should be charging for planning costs because I think it would be cost prohibitive. I think costs for special events as they stand now are difficult for event sponsors to bear, and adding more to that would be entirely too burdensome. But we would just like to see consistency so that all of the departments can either charge for planning costs or not charge for planning costs, because right now there is an inequity in terms of the ability to recover those costs. And then 14 is that the council authorized city attorney to develop a penalty and enforcement guidelines for failure to obtain a special event permit. So there are some events and some very savvy event sponsors who circumvent the permitting process because they don't want to pay the fees. And so they will hold their event and really without penalty. And I think LAPD could respond, could delve into the details a little bit about some of their enforcement recently under Section 4120. I think, Garvin, do you want to, Lieutenant?
Well, we actually have been using Section 4120 for the film side, film enforcement, because, but you want to answer specifically to boss events. We haven't used that ordinance or any other ordinance to enforce anything at a street services events. We have had several incidents where that deal with the electronic music parties and the raves and whatnot. There was one recently at a studio, a Center City Studios, and it went through the boss process, and ultimately they didn't have the required some other LAPD permits that were required, and so the event couldn't take place because they didn't have their dance permit and some other stuff. But, so we were involved in that aspect of that couldn't happen. But as far as enforcement, we've tried. The language of the ordinance says, you know, if the event requires municipal services beyond what is the normal, this process takes place. The difficulty we have are on those events that don't require sidewalk or street closure, but they require municipal services to a great degree, and we haven't been able to use this ordinance yet to kind of require that those organizers get the permit. So that would be something.
Yeah, I think the benefit of these penalty guidelines would be that we are able to very clearly recover costs for city services that are deployed for events that should have gotten a permit, knew they needed a permit, but didn't, and city services have to be deployed anyway, but we should be able to recover those costs after the fact, even though they have not pulled a permit.
And so now, all you do is either prevent the event from happening, or you shut down the event if it is happening, if they don't have proper.
Well, the ones that
remedy right now.
the one at the studios, yeah, it was.
Let's say there's a block party and proper permits were not pulled. What does LAPD do in those instances?
Well, you would have to have a section to cite. You know, you can only enforce a law that's on the books. So this, I think that's one of the things that the commissioner is asking for, is for 4120 to be amended in a way that there's very clear language in there that if it's required of you,
Yeah.
this is the penalty if you don't, because right now that's not in the language.
Okay.
In a nutshell, those are our 14 recommendations.
Good.
If
Thank
you have any questions about any of the 14, we are all happy to answer them.
One general question is, First Amendment special events, how does that fit into this again?
Yeah,
Or do
First
we-
Amendment events are permitted by the Los Angeles Police Department, and do you guys want to speak
Is this going
specifically
to
to that?
impact that at all? Should we kind of address that now? Anything we need to address through this
Well,
as we're making changes?
this 4120, the First Amendments are covered by 103.111 of the municipal code. It's a separate process. You got to go to the LAPD for your permit, and that would be a policy decision if you're going to decide to, you know, overhaul the ordinances and have a truly, one code for everything. I know the fire department may have some questions about that.
The difference in First Amendment events and the events that the Bureau of Street Services permits is that we don't recover costs for First Amendment events. For all other special events, we do recover costs for, so, which would be parades, assemblies as defined in the code.
Is it a legal issue? Why we don't?
It is a legal issue.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the city attorney has given us advice on this on a number of occasions. First Amendments, or the series of parades, assemblies, or other groups can be expressive, or they can be celebratory, or other things. But when it comes down to definition, they're all First Amendment. And in that context, the city attorney has advised that we cannot charge more than what we do for the best of our special events, which is block parties, which is 100%. 100% of the cost is returned back to the block party participant. So what happens legally, we really can't charge, because some of our citizens are getting 100% return on that, and we could not charge a First Amendment right, a First Amendment event, anything more than that.
It comes down to you can't treat them any worse. So, you know, you got the whole issue of desperate treatment there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, though, in some contexts, especially a parade that's on a citywide special event list, that we can't charge the participant, but we can, in some instances, return the money back, reimburse the city costs back to the departments for those charges. While we can't do the participant, the organization, we can find a mechanism to repay the services rendered by our departments.
Well, we allocate a certain amount each year in our budget to handle the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I think the fire department had.
Mark Storms, Assistant Fire Marshal. Relative to recommendation 13, although we support Commissioner Alacon's concerns of charging for special events. I do believe that there should be a discussion relative to the fees for developing plans for the major events, for that category, because of the significant impact to the staff of both fire, police, DOT, relative to Academy Awards, the marathon, and some of these significant events that require, traditionally we have paid for out of variable staffing funds to get these planning processes underway and to meet the timetable of the organizer who calls the meetings, and we have to attend at their discretion, or at our discretion, but we have to pay our folks if they're off duty.
Well, you're really speaking to item number 3, correct? As opposed to 13 is the planning, that speaks to the
Well,
planning?
during the planning process for the development of incident action plans, strategies and
Oh, I
tactics
see.
on how we're going to prepare and what our deployment will be.
So, for example, the NBA All-Star Week, we have, again, we've mentioned it and referenced it several times, but we have all been attending various meetings for the past several months in terms of planning strategies for the transportation plan, security plan, for all of the NBA and related events and activities. However, we do not recover costs for all of the time that we as city staff devote to planning their event.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, there's a careful balance here between costs of the service that we provide to the event organizer and the costs that are incurred as you run up to the event, all the planning costs. Like you mentioned earlier, we don't want to scare our private sector friends who come in here to provide large events and then stick them with a huge bill, and they're not going to want to return, they're not going to come back. So we need to be careful as to how we structure the cumulative cost of these events to our event organizers. So while I'm sympathetic, the city's sympathetic to the fact that there are costs incurred, there's time involved, we need to have a balance there between what we can truly charge and what they would expect from us, bringing a large event to the city with some economic spin-off factors, that would provide the city with, several $1 million worth of economic opportunity.
So while the NBA requires significant planning, they have also projected that they are going to generate $83 million of revenue locally. So yes, it takes, a lot of city time to help plan these events. They are providing a significant economic benefit to the city in return.
But more specifically, what would the fire department's recommendation be?
Well, I think we concur with both CLA and Commissioner Alacon, and it can be done by what our policy is here in the city. And if we want to budget for those significant events to each of those individual departments for those planning components, that could be a more viable way of doing it, counter the significant economical benefit it comes to the city. So I think that might be a better way to go.
Mr. Chairman, we would suggest that this particular request be returned to staff to have real discussions of how we could structure this with the fire department and the LAPD, BOSS, our office, CAO. There are real concerns here about recovery of costs, and we would like to structure this in a way that makes sense for all of us.
And LAPD's perspective would mirror the gentleman's comments here. We're keenly aware of the economic, situation that the city is in, and whether, 5 years from now, the bottom line is that we don't want to be a deterrent to business within the city of Los Angeles. That said, their expense, they are quite an expense, whether it be planning or actually deployment for these events. So we recognize that there's a balance, and we would like the opportunity, and we enjoy the opportunity in speaking and working with the commissioner and her staff and with the fire department, developing something that does make sense. We are reluctant to give any kind of a knee-jerk response or reaction to this, given its weight.
Well, I was hoping to move this item today, and it'd be good if we move this, but have that discussion on this particular item continue.
On the item itself, Mr. Chairman, we would recommend that the committee request the city attorney, with the cooperation of BOSS and the CLA, to begin drafting an amending language and have that draft of ordinance brought back to this committee for its review.
That'll be the recommendation at the end of the discussion, but we could also have the CLA lead a discussion on the item that was raised right now.
Sure.
In terms of the
Planning costs.
planning
costs.
costs.
And with that, there's only one additional that the fire department would like to include the language, and that's in recommendation number 3, that there are going to be times when the fire department, the police department, and we even discussed Department of Transportation would trigger a Bureau Street Services process. And I can give you a fast example. We'll get a call from Secret Service that the President of the United States is going to be flying in. We're going to all be in meetings that we've all been in, and we're going to be the ones that will be the genesis of that process. It's going to be a private event paid for by the Democratic National Committee, and those will be times that we want to go ahead and generate the BOSS permit process then early on.
Right, so I think what the recommendation from Fire Department is to include 3 additional departments in the last factor. So where it reads, "And if BOSS determines that the impact of the area will negatively affect public convenience and necessity," their specific request is to include DOT, LAPD, and LAFD to be provided the authority to determine the public necessity.
That's fine, yeah. Okay, we'll make that amendment there. All right, so on this item, I know it's related to the other two, but do you have any other questions? The recommendation could be to request the city attorney with the assistance of the CLA and BOSS to prepare a draft ordinance and refer the matter to Budget and Finance. Should we also refer it to Personnel Committee, or should we bring it, would you suggest we bring it back here?
Well, we do have the issue of the managed hiring on your position, so it would go to personnel.
Refer the managed hiring issue to the Personnel Committee. And
I think the direction of the committee now should be to have them start writing up the
amendments to the ordinance.
yes,
Okay.
to start that work, because we'd like to see this move forward as
Okay.
soon as
That will
possible.
be the recommendation. Okay. And now we'll take up item 2 and 3. I know that they're related to the first item, so if you guys could still stick around, yeah, you guys could do as you wish, stay up here, sit right there, whatever you like.
On item 2, I think there's a request for a technical adjustment on the language in paragraph 1 of the draft communication, which was originally, council member, your communication from the chair. We will provide the clerk with the amending language. It's just a technical change to correct some, in the second sentence, it says, "In addition to obtaining the required petition with 51% approval by property owners in the impacted area." We don't think that's necessary here. And we also were looking at ways of modeling after the Film LA model, and the petition part is not within that model. So we would just like to have that removed.
Okay, we'll make that change.
Okay, and in terms of items 2 and 3, I think we at least touched on some of the issues. Item 2 pertains to event notification, and so we did talk about 3 recommendations contained in the annual report that were specific to notification. And then item 3 is specific to draft payment installment plans, and we talked about the letters of agreement and amending the ordinance to provide some flexibility in terms of provision of payment for the special event funds. So I think we've covered some of that in the discussion in item number 1, but if you have specific questions on notification or the payment plan, again, we're happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you. Let me take up public comment card, and then we'll go back to the discussions on 2 and 3. Maybe they could sit up here at the end.
Mr. Chairman, also on number 3, the report from our office relative to the installment plan, you probably can note and file that, because we will incorporate whatever additional language from that report into the language we're drafting with the assistance of the city attorney's office to provide for those installment mechanisms.
The end result on this could be that we could note and file both 2 and 3, because they've been incorporated in one, right? or does 2 require different action? No, both of them could be no filed, correct?
I think you just, 2, you can go forward with the modification. You want the, 2 is just the draft report on the notification.
Right, so the
So we
draft
just move
report
forward on that one.
On the notification, the original report on the notification, the recommendations contained in that report included some of those electric message boards and so forth, didn't carve out the exemption for the film and entertainment premieres and so forth. So all of those are incorporated also in this annual report.
So we can't even file
We
it.
can.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, it's encompassed within the other one, so.
Number
we're
1.
fine.
If we could take a public comment, Estelle Lopez?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Estella Lopez, representing the Central City East Association and the Arts District and Downtown Industrial District BIDs. First of all, thank you to everyone here for tackling this issue, taking it on, and answering a lot of the issues that were of special concern to us in the BID communities. But 2 small things that I do want to bring up before you close these discussions. They're small, but they have significant importance to the commercial districts. In recommendation number 11 of notification, most of this seems to apply after the event has been approved, and then to be able to help disseminate the information.
I'm sorry, can you, what item?
Under recommendation number 11, which deals with notification and the special recommendation to have business improvement districts involved. This language addresses events that have already...
Hold on.
Okay.
Continue, please.
Okay. Do I wait? Do I
Yeah,
go?
no, continue.
All right. I don't want to set it off again. It's me. We want to be the business improvement. I can't speak for every BID in the city, but I know that our 2 BIDs want to be involved ahead of time. When the event is being proposed, we want to be able to be involved in the notification. In our areas, we have a lot of nonprofits that go, or they say they go door to door to collect these signatures. We have in our database every business, every property owner. We have a much more efficient way of gauging the impact of a proposed event. So I would like to continue to work with the board to develop a system of communication that will involve the business improvement districts before the event is approved, because many times, as is happening at this very moment, I'm working with the Fred Jordan Mission to recalibrate their street closure request in a way that they can still have their event and minimize the impact on the business community. So that's why that's important. And secondly, one of the things that Commissioner Alarcon and I discussed, that we discovered, was that when streets are going to be closed, DOT will post signs that say no parking or no stopping. And the community feels that that's the only impact. There is no sign that currently exists in the city system that says that this street's going to be closed. So somehow that needs to be rectified, because people will come into a district and just see no stopping or no parking tomorrow between this hour and this hour, and they think that the street will be open, just no parking. In fact, the streets many times are closed, but that's the only sign DOT can post. That's the only sign they have. So that, for a commercial district like ours, is significant.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any response to that?
In response to her 2 concerns, I'm more than happy to work with Estella and various other bids to develop a communication plan. Our process currently disseminates the information to them. We send them emails when we receive the application. So not only when they are approved, when the permits are approved, they receive notification when the event applications are received by the Bureau. So we are, again, happy to work with her to enhance that communication plan. But in terms of her second concern, yes, it is true that the Department of Transportation does not have a particular sign that indicates that the street will be closed for special event purposes. I am working directly with the Department of Transportation to develop and design a sign which would mirror a temporary no parking sign, but it would say specifically that it's going to be closed for purposes of a special event on what day and on what time.
Okay. Just buy a box of Sharpies? Yeah. Let's do this then. On item number 1, we will move that item and request the city attorney to draft the appropriate language with the assistance of the CLA and BOSS and come back to committee with that. And do we have to refer to Budget and Finance and Personnel at this time or afterwards?
I think it's been referred to Budget and Finance already.
It has?
I
Okay.
think they've requested to hear.
Okay, so that's fine. That's going to take an action of its own. Item number 2, I was going to notify, but why don't we do this? If you could work with Estella and any other interested bids on those 2 items, then we'll hear this again at the appropriate time, just to finalize those 2 items. It was the Central City East Association who brought this to our attention in the first place. I want to make sure their concerns are addressed in notification. So we'll continue item number 2, and item 3 we will note and file. Okay. And thank you all very, very much for your hard work. I know this is a lot of work, and I appreciate all the time you put into this. Thank you. And with your approval, Mr. Alarcon, items that were on consent today will get your A as well, so it will only be A. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for coming.